Let me add my own personal welcome to the 52nd annual meeting of the Board of Governors, and observe that after 2 years of disruptions due to the pandemic, what better way to restart face-to-face engagement than here in the very beautiful Turks and Caicos Islands. Premier, I wish to thank you, your government, and the people of Turks and Caicos Islands for the exceptional hospitality afforded to us thus far, and our governors and board of directors for their continued support and strong encouragement as we take forward the development business for the people of this region. Governors, last year I said we must move with deliberate haste. I also said that there can be no sustained development without resilience. And because development has to be holistic, meaning leaving no aspect behind, resilience must therefore be multifaceted. And so we need a resilience ecosystem capable of absorbing the exogenous shocks we are exposed to. This year's meeting takes place against the backdrop of the enduring aftermath of COVID-19 and now the impact of the Russia-Ukraine war. This conflict has already affected commodity and financial markets, raised energy prices, increased inflation, heightened food insecurity, and slowed global growth. The sharp increase in energy prices is further straining fragile fiscal positions in our borrowing member countries and threatening to derail the nascent economic recovery. Even as growth in the Caribbean region is expected to rebound to around 6% in 2022, that's on the strength of the rebound in tourism and the performance of Guyana, and a rebound from an average decline of around 8% in 2020, roughly half of our internationally rated BMCs have suffered credit downgrades since the onset of the pandemic. Consequently, many of our governments are now challenged to walk on economic tightrope while at the same time trying to drive the development agenda. Essentially, governors, sustainable recovery now hangs in the balance, and the imperative to aggressively pursue resilience is even more urgent. With this in mind, today, the words of my dear friend and brother President Adesina, we must be prepared to sprint fast, like Shelley and Fraser Price of Jamaica, and run long, like Eliud Kipchoge of Kenya. That is to say, we must accelerate our development trajectory, and we must be able to stay the course over the long haul. That is, development once started must be sustained. The 2030 targets are not just boxes to be checked off. The path we embark on must take us beyond 2030. As I share my thoughts on how we accelerate and sustain development, I will spend a few moments reflecting on the road traveled over the last 12 months of our pursuit of holistic development. And then I will elaborate on a few major initiatives for 2022 and beyond. When I assumed office just over a year ago, my presentation to the board outlined an agenda that focused on the transformative and sustainable development of our BMCs with the ultimate goal of improving the welfare of our people. This approach, which I have been consistently promoting regionally, speaks to development that is both holistic and inclusive, with resilience and innovation as cornerstones. The fundamental themes around which much of my efforts have been centered are sustainable livelihoods, resilient economies, connectivity, and innovation hub. These are fully aligned with the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals that we need to pursue expeditiously if we are to fundamentally alter the development path of the region and place our societies on a higher and more resilient, sustainable welfare path in the future. The challenge before us is how best to navigate a safe path from legacy structural weaknesses to transformative development while maintaining debt sustainability, enhancing macroeconomic and financial stability, and building resilience against a myriad of shocks. Surely not an easy mix to actually get together. Among shocks, I would like to highlight climate change, which, if unchecked, can pose an existential threat to the region. Governors with the best of intentions and with access to adequate and affordable finance, our efforts will labor in producing results without a significant jolt to our implementation capacity. To achieve this, our first order of business at the bank was to revise our strategic plan to reflect the changed context and circumstances of the Caribbean development trajectory. Reflecting our new vision, we anchored the revised plan on 5 dimensions of resilience: social resilience, productive capacity resilience, environmental resilience, institutional resilience, and financial resilience. Secondly, and in alignment with a key theme over the past year of measuring better to target better, we recognize that the Caribbean Development Bank itself needed to become a knowledge-enabled learning organization with a virtual knowledge hub, a network of networks, as it were, capable of accessing global information, culling experiences of and factors contributing to success, and at the same time creating value through strategies that, when implemented, can yield transformative development. To be clear, the philosophy of embracing knowledge creation, from accumulation to discovery to strategic transformation, touches everything we do and manifests in every development challenge that we face, from achieving food security to compiling the genome structure of herbs and plants in agriculture, for creating medicines to designing resilient roofs capable of generating and withstanding the fury, generating electricity and withstanding the fury of hurricanes, while providing an adequate supply of clean, renewable energy. In other words, we need to embrace what I am calling the industrialization of knowledge. This will require improvements in current processes, organization, technology, and a fearless, growth-oriented mindset to underpin our knowledge management and evidence-based decision creation. To illustrate, the Knowledge Hub could encompass a tracker for the region's development process and progress. It can be a platform for policy options and the design of SDGs. It can be used to promote warehoused information on feasible and development-driven investment opportunities, the regulatory environment, and doing business conditions that could promote cross-border investments. Could be used to be a database with comparable economic, social, and environmental statistics, and partial screened project ideas that could help advance sustainable development. Further, it could also be used as a fertile ground for spawning innovative ideas and products. All those fall within the philosophy of a knowledge hub. Third, in recognition of the fact that the internal resilience capacity of our BMCs must be accounted for in determining their ability to recover from exogenous shocks, We made steady progress with the development of the Recovery Duration Adjuster, which builds on the United Nations Multidimensional Vulnerability Index by integrating vulnerability and resilience in a dynamic and forward-looking manner to better reflect the economic, social, and environmental realities of small island developing states. This framework focuses on measuring the internal resilience capacity of SIDS, which, because of their peculiar vulnerabilities and state of development, face the reality of a much longer recovery time from a shock compared with developed nations. It proposes to replace gross national income, GNI, which is widely recognized as an inadequate metric to determine access to concessional finance, by an internal resilience capacity metric for gauging a country's eligibility to access adequate and affordable finance. We launched this framework at the 20 Nations Climate Change Conference, COP26, in November of 2021 in the United Kingdom, and have since held discussions and made presentations to several stakeholder groups, including the Commonwealth Secretariat, the Alliance of Small Island States, and the United Nations High-Level Panel on the Multidimensional Vulnerability Index. With that background of what we have engaged in over the last year, I'd like to fast forward a little and talk about big initiatives we are looking at for 2022. So as we look towards 2022 and 2023 and beyond that, no one could have anticipated the continuation of the COVID-19 pandemic or the protracted nature of the Ukraine-Russia conflict. We are also yet to see the full ramifications of this conflict for our region. This prolonged uncertainty necessitates, I want to underline necessitates, that we proceed with even more haste to create the sustainable future that we envisage for the region. And as such, we need to focus our attention on what this future should look like and how we could best create it. Not how we could best let it happen, how we could best create it. Now that we have laid the contours for sustainable development in our region, our focus for 2022 to 2023 will be on advancing food and nutrition security, energy security, and water security. I think you will all agree these are three key securities that the region cannot afford not to address over the near and long term. So let me begin first with food and nutrition security. For decades, the Caribbean has been over-reliant on food imports. The World Bank estimates that between 80 and 90% of all food consumed in the region comes from abroad. And only 3 countries in the region, Guyana, Belize, and Haiti, produce more than 50% of their own food. The COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated existing inequalities across the board, including in employment, housing, healthcare, and food security. It is estimated that there are now 2.7 million food insecure people in the English-speaking Caribbean. And according to the third round of the CARICOM COVID-19 Food Security and Livelihoods Impact Survey, 71% of respondents observe higher than usual food prices. While a breakdown of responses by gender wasn't presented by that survey, we know historically in this region, women are disproportionately affected by food and nutrition security. As a region, we must therefore focus on building a modern, competitive, inclusive, and resilient agricultural sector in which food and nutrition security have primacy of place and the potential for wealth creation as an attraction to young agripreneurs. And again, I'm going to use the word of my brother president here. At the recent Agri-Investment and Food Forum in Guyana, as mentioned by our Governor, Minister Singh, CARICOM heads of government expressed grave concern about food shortages, the high prices of imported food, fertilizers, and other agricultural inputs, and the limited options for transportation of agricultural products within the region. They have stressed the need for urgent action to take forward the vision for agricultural development championed by President Irfan Ali of Guyana that targets a reduction in the food import bill by 25% by 2025, what we call the 25 by 2025 agenda. And if I may add, 25 by 2025 is not enough. Why don't we double it? 50% no later than 2030. Minister, please take this to President Ali. We need to up the game. Efforts to reduce the food import bill must be underpinned by investments in climate-smart and resilient agricultural technologies, by research and development and knowledge systems that connect farmers, industry, and research to sustain the long-term development of the sector. And I'd like to, at that point, welcome the gracious offer from, again, President Adesina as of last night in terms of tech transfer and training potential and the collaboration across MDBs that can actually help spur and drive that very agricultural sector push that we are talking about. It must also include new opportunities for women-owned agri-businesses. As in many of our BMCs, women provide the link between the farm and the traditional marketplace, yet remain at the bottom of the value chain. In endorsing this shared vision for food security, facilitated by our current agricultural policy and strategy and integrated logistics, we have already commenced discussions with partners on mobilizing flexible and innovative financing to support this initiative. We also believe that our appraisal of a CDB-led regional hub for the International Trade Center Global Initiative, SheTrades, will be able to integrate more women in the regional and global agri-trade business, providing value added for women-owned agri-enterprises. Now, on to energy security. Energy is an essential input to all economic activity and has critical ramifications in the social and environmental context. Our high dependence on imported fossil fuels and the associated high cost of electricity has been stifling the pace of growth and development in the region, including poverty reduction efforts, and is a continued threat to the attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals. As such, there is a dire and urgent need to accelerate the transition to increase renewable energy generation, utilizing our abundant solar, wind, hydro, and geothermal resources. While doing so, we need to ensure, and this is important, that the transition is managed to minimize the potential negative effects of disruption, and to ensure that it is just. It is not a 0-1 fossil fuels today, 100% renewables tomorrow. The cost of disruption cannot be ignored, and therefore the pace at which we make that transition has to be an essential element of that development agenda that we are talking about. And I want to underline this because it is important for some of our BMCs, such as Guyana, Suriname, and Trinidad and Tobago, whose economies are largely reliant today on fossil fuels. Fortunately, we are not starting from scratch. Over the last decade, the region has been pursuing a shift towards sustainable energy through the increased use of renewable energy sources and improvements in energy efficiency. The target agreed by our energy ministers is for a 47% contribution from renewable energy by 2027, which translates into a 55% contribution by 2030. However, progress towards that target, admittedly, has been slow. On an annual basis, our renewable energy penetration rate need to increase 13-fold, 13-fold, if we are to achieve the target of 55% by 2030. So therefore, there is a tremendous amount of work that needs to go forward. However, current estimate of doing that, the transition we talk of, will cost over $20 billion US. $20 billion US. At the bank, we are updating our energy sector policy and strategy and have proposed to embed within it a framework called the Accelerated Sustainable Energy and Resilience Transition 2030. And that's a lot to keep in mind, so you can just keep the acronym ASSERT, A-S-E-R-T, ASSERT 2030 framework. And so you'll be hearing from CDB when we talk about ASSERT Initiative 1, ASSERT Initiative 2. But that's all about accelerating sustainable energy framework. And that is intended to support our BMCs as they urgently ramp up the energy sector transitions. Third, water security. Water security, which is already being threatened by the impact of climate change, is especially critical to the region's development, especially in key sectors such as health, agriculture, and tourism. Since 2018, CDB has supported, with partners, the development, refinement, and promotion of the Regional Strategic Action Plan for Climate Resilience in the water sector in the Caribbean. We are currently revising our water policy, strategy, and operational guidelines with the support of Agence Française de Développement, with a completion date of December 2022, end of this year. At the country level, we are supporting approximately $131 million US in projects in Barbados, the Bahamas, Belize, the Commonwealth of Dominica, Grenada, Jamaica, St. Lucia, Nevis, and Suriname, which are delivering on all elements of the water chain, in infrastructure, in institutional strengthening, and capacity building to enhance water security through works, systems, and people. We are collaborating with the IDB and the Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility on the formation of a Caribbean water utility insurance company with an initial product launch planned for sometime in 2022. So what would be the target we would need to be able to look forward to? So going forward in the water sector, our target is to reduce non-revenue water from an average of 60% today to no more than 30% by 2030. And to significantly strengthen data collection, sharing, and analysis to support integrated water resources management. Governors, the development needs of the region and the attainment of the SDGs require significant collective effort and financial resources. I have highlighted food, energy, and water, but there are additional SDGs that would need to be equally addressed. But building on this year's theme of measure better to target better, I propose for next year that we hone in on the theme of access to adequate and affordable finance. And we will state it today, it's hashtag AAAF, access to adequate and affordable finance. Why is this? Because we cannot do any of the securities we talked about in food, in energy, and in water without access to finance. We cannot do any of the development that we are talking about without access to finance. But it is not just finance, it has to be quality finance. And quality finance now becomes adequate, has to be sufficient and affordable, such that we can get out of the debt trap that would ensue if we are not able to mobilize finance at an affordable rate. This access will shape a future where our citizens can live quality lives in societies that have embraced digitalization and possess robust private sector partnership with the requisite governance arrangements to safeguard food and energy security. So let me put this in context for you in terms of the numbers we are talking about. Initial estimates we have done at the CDB suggest that providing financing for projects on the scale envisaged in building resilience, encouraging transformation, and achieving sustainable development would require upwards of $100 billion over the next decade. $100 billion over the next decade. That is the entirety of the GDP of all of our countries put together in terms of 1 year. Across our BMCs, during 2023 to 2030, we estimate that sustainable energy will require at least $40 billion. Water and sanitation, $22 billion. Transportation, an additional $11.5 billion. Agriculture and food security, possibly $13 billion. Digital transformation, another $12 billion. And these are mostly infrastructure and associated elements to generate the three goals we are talking about. But in addition, we have also said that we need to move to halving poverty by 2030. And for that to happen, BMCs would require an investment approximately of another $10 billion annually. So if we take another decade, that's another $100 billion that we would need to put onto that tab. And that $10 billion, I need not tell you, far exceeds current investment levels in the region. So obviously our needs are humongous. How we are going to get there is the quintessential problem that we need to solve, and hence why next year we want to dedicate the entire year to access to adequate and affordable financing. So cognizant of the current capacity of CDB, I posit that meeting this target will be a function of creating partnerships to facilitate access to adequate and affordable financing for development. In other words, we do not have the means to do it on our own. And the only way we can get there is if we can crowd in, if we can bring various players together, various stakeholders together to allow us to make a dent in the element of development that we propose. We are equally aware that our regional governments have been playing a significant role in driving development at the national and regional levels, but recognize at the same time that they cannot do it alone, especially given current high debt levels and the limited fiscal space that they are all struggling with. And therefore, we need to embrace the private sector as the other side to crowd in to allow us to make a dent in development. So the private sector will need to play an equally important role in delivering development outcomes and in financing sustainable transformation and development in the region. Hence the clarion call to create a partnership for development, not a public-private partnership, a partnership for development between the public and private sectors, where national anchor goals like food and nutrition security, energy security, and water security drive individual and joint efforts at achieving milestones to the ultimate anchors. This has to be underpinned by national dialogue and the fostering of an absence of policy uncertainty. So, how do we mobilize the finance for development? First, we need to ensure that we have or can facilitate the mobilization of the quantum of funds needed. In other words, the adequate aspect of adequate and affordable. And for us to do this, we think it must be multi-source, meaning we need to crowd in from many places. It must be multi-instrument. And the framework must be such that it has a properly developed financial market infrastructure and a strong regulatory environment, because if we don't have that, there is no way you can generate the necessary confidence in the investors to allow them to want to continue to provide you with the necessary finance, which, as we said, is not a sprint, but a long marathon. And so we will need to be able to get funds, not for 1 year or for 2 years, but for many, many years going forward. Therefore, it will be important to distinguish, in my mind, various uses of finance. All finance is not created equally, and all finance is not used in the same way. And consequently, we believe in the multi-source, multi-instrument environment that we are talking about. We need to be able to distinguish financing for rescue operations, financing for recovery operations, and financing for long-term repositioning. Because while we are at the game of reacting and fixing and getting ourselves back from crises, we have to at the same time run a parallel track of ensuring that we have access to finance for the longer-term development that we seek to obtain. So therefore, this is a sprint and a long-distance run at the same time, but using our finance in a very discriminatory way. We will need a suite of financing instruments with specific terms that can be combined coherently to manage different needs. I've already talked about the 3 different types, while providing adequate governance safeguards, which is important for both the public and the private sectors. As an example, the suite of instruments that I talk about that we can use to mix to generate the goals that we are looking to achieve need to, by necessity, include almost all of the instruments that exist now in the financial space. So 1, debt instruments, and there I can think of SDG-themed bonds, for example, green bonds, sponsored blue bonds to finance projects for ocean conservation and marine biodiversity. We can have orange bonds for growing our cultural and creative industries, for example, our music and sports and creative design. In addition to the debt, we need to be able to crowd in private equity for funding specific development-related objectives with auxiliary governance and taxonomies to monitor, evaluate, and ensure achievement of goals. We will at the same time need contingent debt instruments. We've spoke of the insurance types, like your CRIFs, the catastrophe bonds like we had in Jamaica, GDP bonds or GDP index bonds that can be tailored to activity as it occurs, and what we can equally look at as policy reform or policy intervention, incentivizing bonds that will repay dividends of refinancing at lower rates as long as you deliver on the interventions that were in the contract. This can be done in terms of successive tranches, such that as soon as your grace period is done, you should have completed sufficient interventions to reprice your your bond in a way that can reduce your debt and make your debt sustainability a lot more attractive than it would have been in the absence of that. We also need derivative-based instruments, like the debt swap of Belize. And that's a whole class of instrument that we can actually begin to tailor and provide advice to our countries as to how they can manage the debts that they have now. And let's not forget concessional funding. We have the development partners, the international financial institutions, specialty themed funding, such like your Global Climate Fund and the Adaptation Fund or the JEF. And all of those together, when I talk about it being multi-sourced, means that we need to be able to tap into not just what we can generate on our own, but equally what we can crowd in from the private sector, what we can get from the public sectors, domestic and external. And the key will be, how do we deploy this through the multiplicity of instruments that we talk about in a way that is internally coherent and at the same time temporally consistent over time. The second aspect, I spoke of adequacy. The second aspect of affordability can be underpinned, we believe, by greater access to concessional funds through the initiative of our recovery duration adjuster. As I indicated, this is a tool that is meant to provide more equitable access to finance through the incorporation of resilience with vulnerability that addresses better the needs of our countries rather than the current gross national income. Another way we can crowd in additional funds in a concessional way is the channeling of special drawing rights from our non-borrowing member countries and other non-members that have SDRs that they can actually mobilize through the bank. And we are seeing multilateral development banks in general, but clearly CDB in particular. And that mobilization of funds need to be such that we can focus the deployment of those funds specifically to development purposes. It is not mobilization of SDRs for mobilization's sake, but mobilization with a purpose. And those purposes can very well be anchored on achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. And that would be one way of attracting new concessional resources from sovereigns and other institutions, while we can equally mobilize better and deploy better the existing pool of resources that already exist. In addition to all of those, we need to promote policies to improve risk profiles and therefore lower market premia on funds that we seek to access. Now, I say this because we typically think that resources ought to always be just a lower price. But the truth of the matter is, return and risk go hand in hand. And the only reason why markets insist on higher returns is because there is a perception that your risk is high. And therefore, we can assist that process by undertaking reforms that change our risk profile. And if your risk profile changes, by automatic extension, the required premia that markets will require to access funds will automatically go down. In other words, you would be buying concessionality through investment in risk reduction. And so when I say policies for risk reduction, I think this is an area that is a self-help tool that we can engage on and help to reduce and change our risk profiles in a way that would allow us to therefore earn the right to lower premia in market financing. So let me turn now, having spoken of the need for access to finance, the multi-sources that we need to access that finance, the sort of instruments that we can use to deploy all to get to that development phase. And I want to talk briefly about the concept of implementation that I mentioned at the beginning of my remarks. I want to be clear. Having adequate and affordable finance, creating opportunities for demand of projects, promoting partnerships, and doing all the things that we talked about that are needed and necessary will still not yield optimal, sustainable outcomes without effective implementation capacity. In other words, without implementation capacity, all the good things that we talk about, all the money that we seek to get will not bring us the results that we need. And so yesterday, I joined with the governor from St. Vincent and the Grenadines in making again another clarion call. We need to address the implementation deficit in the region. The implementation deficit, if I can add, looms large as possibly the most significant factor at both the institutional, national, and regional levels that inhibits the ability of our countries to execute and maximize the benefits from approved policies, projects, and programs that seek to deepen regional integration and achieve our sustainable development goals. We need to take decisive steps to address the bottlenecks impacting effective implementation, including reforming the legislative framework to facilitate investment and innovation, improving processes to reduce bureaucracy and lengthy procurement processes, enhancing project and people management and skills for the future of work, encouraging a cultural change in mindset. And here I'm referring to the adoption of a private sector enterprise mindset nationally, embracing failure as the spur for your next success, and a strong compliance culture. And moving from a project-based approach to a development continuum approach, where monitoring, evaluation, adaptation, and nimbleness provide the thread linking projects to ultimate objectives. At the CDB, we will be placing emphasis over the next year on the following strategic initiatives. First, developing the Knowledge Hub, which I spoke to briefly. And let me give you the rationale. Ready access to update information and accurate information is a prerequisite for evidence-based, effective knowledge creation and decision-making. However, the region's knowledge and information management processes are still quite fragmented, and this has limited our ability to initiate and sustain important policy reforms. Going forward, we need to eliminate this fragmentation by building a common platform to accumulate, analyze, transform, and share knowledge in the economic, social, and environmental dimensions. The second initiative is we are going to embed, or we wish to, embed the RDA and the internal resilience capacity concepts in our internal processes. Here, our focus will be on developing the vulnerability and resilience tool for adoption in the bank's operational processes. This tool will enable a deeper diagnosis of vulnerability and resilience in countries and provide some assessment of their overall ability to recover from shocks and maintain ongoing economic and social processes. Third initiative is to foster the idea of a single digital space. Digital transformation has the potential to revolutionize economic and social life by lowering information costs, reducing the cost of economic and social transactions for firms, individuals, and the public sector, and increasing efficiency and access to services. So here our emphasis would be on fostering the development of appropriate, harmonized regulatory and security frameworks, upgrade of information technology infrastructure, and access to broadband services across private and public sectors to achieve the common purpose of a regional, secure, digital, grid-free of all digital divides by 2035. Fourth initiative, CDB can be a regional hub for the Global She Trades initiative and thereby power an entire generation of young women into businesses. Inclusive trade is a critical component to achieving gender parity. It creates more job opportunities for women with higher wages and better working conditions. On September 2015, the International Trade Center launched the She Trades initiative to empower women economically through greater integration in global trade and investment, with a goal to connect 1 million women markets by 2020, and that we have achieved. CDB is currently appraising the establishment of a CDB-led regional hub for she trades, joining a global practice with a global partner, and would also be in a position to either match or leverage additional resources to improve market access for women-owned businesses. Moreover, CDB would be able to anchor its future interventions in a programmatic fashion. CDB continues to help boost women's participation in private sector development in its BMCs, and is currently coordinating more support to expand their access to technical finance and investment, training, coaching, and mentoring, and other technical assistance. We seek to meet a target of over 2,000 women-owned led MSMEs by 2024. This specific support is viewed as critical to increasing the participation of these enterprises in public procurement markets. The bank is also encouraging the governments in its BMCs to ensure that their public procurement frameworks address any systemic barriers to women's participation, and that they also promote increased participation by and opportunities for women-owned businesses, indigenous people, and persons with disabilities. Governors, directors, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, as we deliberate on how to create the future we want, I ask you to join our coalition for development, including the development institutions here with us, the regional and international private sectors, the regional public sector, and our development partners. I ask us all to recommit to action. Enough said. To not allow the optimism of the will to be overcome by the pessimism of the intellect. We can do what we need to do as long as we have the will to do it. CDB is the Caribbean's development bank, and I pledge our readiness to act. As the governor for St. Vincent and the Grenadines implored us yesterday, let us not be caught arranging the chairs on the deck of the Titanic. Instead, let us match words with action and transform our reimagined visions into reality for our people. Let us move forward with deliberate haste. I thank you.